I'm about to give you the cheat codes to improve product adoption, but let's be honest. If your boss is asking you to improve product adoption, then you should probably find a new boss because that's just about as vague as a dingo's dinner plans. There are so many ways to look at product adoption and to measure it. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to break down 10 of the most critical metrics that you should be tracking when it comes to product adoption. And I'll let you decide which you should use when, where, why, and how. Let's get into it. But let me back it up just 1 second. The whole point of me doing this video is we have this enormous blog post on our blog about 10 product adoption metrics. It's massive. It's got a lot of chunky bits in it. But if you want to skip that and you just want to hear the real quick and dirty, get all the good nuggets out of it, then stay for this video. I'm just going to run you through all of the things that you need to know. When we're looking at product adoption metrics, there are really 4 buckets that these metrics fit into. They are the onboarding related metrics, the feature metrics, the engagement metrics, and the funnel metrics. The first bucket of metrics that we're going to dive into are the onboarding related metrics. All of these metrics have to do with your brand new users getting into your product as quickly as possible and having a great old time using all of the features and living their best life. The first metric from this bucket that we're going to dive into is the onboarding completion rate. Your onboarding journey for your users starts the second that they sign up for your app. That's pretty straightforward. The trickiness comes in when you need to define when that onboarding process has been completed. There are 2 really common ways to approach this. The first is via completing an onboarding checklist. A wonderful example of this is Gusto. When you're an employee and you jump into Gusto for the first time, you are set on a path of discovery. You are going to be jumping through hoops to upload documents, answer questions, and go through an entire series of checklists to make sure that you're all set up correctly. And Gusto does a fantastic job of walking new users through this process, giving them lots of helpful hints along the way. The second way to approach this completion of the onboarding process is by kind of successfully completing a key action. I can imagine that for Canva, for example, maybe that action would be you have filled in your logo, your brand colors, your fonts, for your style guide. That might be the action that they have set as their kind of onboarding process completed. All of that to say is your onboarding completion rate is simply just the percentage of new users who have gone through that process and either completed that step or gone through the checklist. That's it. The second onboarding metric that I want to dive into is time to value. Now, not unlike our onboarding completion rate, this one is also for our new users. However, with the onboarding completion rate, we're really looking at them finishing the onboarding process. The customer or your user still hasn't had any kind of direct or indirect value out of the platform. So we look at time to value from the time when they sign up to when they get some value out of your product. Riffing on the example of Canva just before, while the setup process has been covered with the onboarding kind of stuff, the time to value could be defined for Canva as when a new user has downloaded their first design. Inherently, they have gotten value out of the app. Now, the problem is if your time to value is so long and it takes forever to get anything out of your product, then you are very, very likely going to lose a lot of those new customers or those new leads that are jumping into your product. You really want to shorten that time span and that time to value as tightly as you possibly can. Moving on to feature metrics now, we are looking at measuring the value and the impact of individual features. And to kick things off, let's start with the feature adoption rate. This is the rate that basically measures how many users are using a particular feature. First, you'll need to define the denominator. If you do not have clean data, then any kind of metric or information that you pull out of these queries are not going to be accurate. For example, if you want to track a feature that is only a paid feature, then you need to remove all of the free users out of that query. As you start playing around in the data, you should be tracking your feature adoption rate over time, which means as you launch new features, if the feature adoption rate is still quite high, a month or a year in advance, you can pretty safely say that it was a successful launch. A good framework to use when you're thinking about feature adoption rates is the feature adoption funnel. This has 4 stages. A user is exposed, then they're activated, They use the feature and then they use the feature again. Taking a little side street now, I want to talk about the feature retention rate. This is a little bit different than feature adoption. And what I mean by that is instead of measuring how many users use a feature, it measures how many users are consistently using a feature. There's a big difference there. Now, this is a little bit trickier to measure, so we really recommend using a tool like Amplitude or Heap when you want to be tracking this kind of data. And just in general, I think it's probably a great idea to get a dashboard set up with either of these tools and map all of these product adoption metrics that we're talking about today. It's good practice. Speaking of good practice, we're going to dive into engagement metrics now. These are the classics. Your daily active users, your weekly active users, and your monthly active users. We've heard all about these, so let's just go over them again as a recap. Kicking things off, we have the engagement rate. Now, there are plenty of ways to define what an engagement rate is. For us, we prefer to divide the daily active users over the monthly active users to give us the number that we're looking for. If you find that your daily active users are pretty close or similar to your monthly active users, you are crushing it. Keep it up. You're doing really great. Lower engagement rate means you might have a little bit of a problem bubbling underneath the surface. It is no secret that you should be trying to build in ways to draw your users back into your product as fulfillingly and as frequently as possible. Keep them sticky. Get them in there. Which brings me to my next metric, which is usage frequency, which is just the percentage of users who accessed your product over time. Let's just say you had 1 million users log into your app ever. And last month you had 10,000 log into your app. That means you had a monthly usage rate of 1%. See how that works? Cool. We're toppling down to the big guns here. We are in the funnel metric stage. Why do I like this point? Because this, my dear friends, is where the money is. Show me the money! Kicking things off is my all-time love-hate favorite, churn. Churn is basically the percentage of users who either drop off or stop using your app. This could mean they no longer log in or use it, or they stop paying. And here's a quick tidbit that you might not know, but a lot of these product adoption metrics that I'm talking about, and in particular like Net Promoter Score, which we'll talk about in a second, these can be little signals early on in the game to kind of flag to you that you are about to face some serious churn. Another trick here is to look at the feature adoption rate across a user base. If there are a bunch of users who aren't using these really prevalent features, then you might be looking down the barrel of some churn. So make sure you don't just ignore these product adoption metrics. They'll help you see around corners if you know where to look. What's the opposite of churn, you asked? Great question. Glad you asked it. It's retention. How do we maintain that your customers and your users are in your product and they're staying with you? We do not want them to leave, and that, my friends, is retention. And if we're retaining them and they're not churning, then we get the opportunity to really look at some spicy numbers when we're calculating the customer lifetime value. Customer lifetime value can be really simple to calculate. It can also get a little bit tricky, but just in layman's terms, what it means is, what is the lifetime of your customer forever, and how much does that customer spend with you over the lifetime? That is your customer lifetime value. You can get a little bit nerdy if you want to go into the numbers here, and you can account for inflation rate and interest rates. You can account for different pricing strategies that are coming up over the lifetime of the customer. I mean, you spreadsheet nerds, have at it, go nuts. And finally, we are at our 10th product adoption metric, the Net Promoter Score, or NPS score. This one is all about loyalty. For example, you've watched this video up until this point. If I asked you, how likely would you be to share this video with your friends, colleagues, or family? You would give me a score on a rating of 1 to 10. 10, yes, Paul, I would absolutely love to share this with anyone and everyone. Then that would make me so happy. You should probably go do that. Or you might say 1 out of 10, meaning probably not going to share this around because it was absolute rubbish. That would break my heart. It would also mean that I'm doing something really, really wrong and I've just wasted, a few minutes of your life. We can pull that analogy into the app. A Net Promoter Score is an opportunity or a way for us to see how we're tracking in terms of the loyalty of our customers. And there we are, we're done. That's our 10 product adoption metrics that I wanted to cover today. It was a lot more fun than reading the blog post, wasn't it? I know there are some of you readers out there who are just gonna be like, well, this was pretty light. You skimmed over a lot of it. That's the point. I wanted to give you the real quick recap. If you want the juicy details, if you want examples from other companies, you want some graphs and metrics, you want some tables in there too, get into the blog post. Search commandbar.com/blog and type in product adoption metrics. This will come up and you'll be able to have some bedtime reading, sit and scroll through it, and make sure that you are tracking the right metrics for your app and for your product. All right, till next time, bye.